Hello and welcome to Parkway, Rudner Law's online show focused on the employment law issues that matter to you. My name is Brittany Taylor. I am a partner at Rudner Law, and I am going to be filling in as your host for this episode of Parkway. Parkway streams live online every month, and if you missed an episode or want to watch one again, they are always available on our YouTube channel, Facebook page, LinkedIn, and our website. If you are watching live and have a question, you can ask by posting a comment on Facebook or YouTube, or tweeting to @RudnerLaw. Today, I'm joined by Isabella Bertani, founder and chief client strategist at Bertani, a boutique audit, tax, and advisory firm in Toronto. I'm also joined by Ryan Mallough, director of Provincial Affairs, Ontario, for the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses. Today, we'll be talking about COVID-19 and the various government support initiatives that either have been available or are currently available to support businesses through this unprecedented time. Isabella, Ryan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us.
So let's start by chatting about the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which I'm going to be calling CEWS from this point on. So it's undergone a lot of changes since its inception. So I'm just going to do a brief recap for our viewers today. So originally we had just a 10% subsidy available. Shortly thereafter, the government had announced a further subsidy, which was up to 75% of an employee's compensation, up to a set maximum per week. To qualify for that subsidy, employers had to have a revenue decrease of at least 30% to qualify. In July, we learned that the government was planning to extend the subsidy to the end of the year and remove this revenue threshold, allowing employers to receive the subsidy on a sliding scale based on their actual revenue decline. And the amount of the subsidy was also designed to gradually decrease over the time to phase out the program in a natural way. However, in September, we got another announcement that the CEWS was being extended into summer 2021. And most recently, on October 9th, the government announced that the subsidy would be frozen at the current rate, which is 65% of an employee's eligible wages, until December 19th of this year. So all of these changes have been made with the intention of making the CEWS more accessible to more employers, but it's also made for a very complex and ever-evolving program. And it also seems that the number of businesses who have applied for the CEWS is still less than what the government was expecting. So what I'd really like to know is I'd like to hear from you guys about your experiences in terms of how businesses have responded to the CEWS to date. Are people applying for the program? Why or why not?
Happy to start. What we found from our clients is they have been applying. There has been some hesitation about the perceived complexity of the program. What I've been doing to guide my clients through it is because the CRA website does have a number of examples in terms of how you can walk through and enter some numbers. So I've been trying to guide clients, and so I think the key is to educate them, because I think it's more perceived complexity than an actual complexity. And I also, have been seeing that with the new expanding program, it actually provides more opportunity for more employers to apply.
Yeah, I'd say we've seen the same sort of thing on our end. For our numbers, CEWS is the second most popular COVID-related program, trailing behind the business loan CEBA just by a couple points. It's also got the second highest approval rating, again, just behind CEBA as well. And I think if there's any concern around the uptake numbers, though, it certainly is around that perceived complexity. I mean, I've checked out the CRA website as well, and I think when you go to the application walkthrough, it's something like 18 bullet points. Each one of those is quite thorough. So I know for a lot of business owners, it's a little bit daunting. I was talking to a restaurant owner just last week who was looking at applying it, saw the form, and just sort of shut his laptop right down and went, you know what, maybe I'll take a little bit of a look later. So it's something that we do very much recommend business owners check in with their accountant on, check in with groups like us on. We can help walk you through it. But that perceived complexity certainly has been a barrier as far as uptake goes.
I wanted to add, because when Ryan said about how his client had shut down his computer, is, even as an accountant, you kind of looked it up and you went, holy cow, look at that. So I understand if from the perspective of a client that they are, can be daunting. And the other thing I've tried to enlighten clients is now they've removed that 14-day rule that was there before, which actually opens it up. Whereas before, if you had someone who was not working during the period, you may not have qualified. Now that that's been removed, you could be entitled for a subsidy where you've just hired or rehired somebody back in. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity. I think the key is, as we said, is education.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that vein, I mean, Isabella, what are some of the common concerns that you hear from your clients when they're looking to you for advice on the SUs?
The first question is always, is it taxable? And of course it is. And then the second one is always by far, are they going to qualify? And I do, where it's a smaller employer, you're getting that more because they're just as we said, it is that a lot of them are doing this on their own, or they need a lot of guidance to it. So I do guide them through that website, even just to say, here's the calculation. Let's see if you qualify to begin with. And I think once they walk through that, they are much more comfortable. There is a more complex spreadsheet that as well, because you're given two options. So I never showed them the spreadsheet first because, they'll have the same reaction I did, which was, holy cow. And then, back to the tax issue, it is a cash subsidy, so it is taxable. The other big thing is about penalties for really not doing correctly. And there's really two, you either can apply and you don't qualify, and then there is all the anti-avoidance rules that don't, that can, if you've claimed knowingly that you don't qualify, that can come in. So, you are talking about 25% penalty minimum if you have a wage subsidy where they've looked at the anti-avoidance rule, where you've made your revenue lower in order to apply. Right.
And I'm sure that would be a huge concern for employers who are looking at this program and are already kind of confused and concerned about whether they are qualifying in the first place, and maybe just thinking to themselves, you know what, I'm just going to step away from this because the potential penalties are too high. Though, as you said, I think a lot of people don't understand that those penalties only come in when you're willfully trying to get around the wage subsidy rules, not when you're just accidentally making an application and don't do it properly.
Exactly.
So let's talk about some of the positive things that have come in from the SUs. So Ryan, I'd love to hear some examples of how this has been helping businesses.
Yeah, so I think right off the bat in the pandemic, we understood from our members fairly quickly that some sort of wage subsidy was going to be needed. We know that labor is the largest fixed cost for most small businesses, and they were going to need help. And the beauty of the wage subsidy is not only does it do that, but it also makes sure that the employee remains tied to the employer. And before the pandemic broke out, the biggest issue that we had in Ontario, British Columbia, and Quebec was a shortage of labor. We had a shortage of skilled labor. We had a shortage in some places of just finding any person to do the job. So making sure that you had a way to weather the pandemic and keep your employees attached to your business so that when we got to the point you could reopen, the employee was there, was going to be crucial. So that's one of the major positives that we've heard coming back. We've also heard that once you do manage to get through the application process, the money seems to be flowing in a reasonable timeline, which with some other programs has been a bit of an issue. And then I will say the other one is, especially since Minister Freeland took over, the government has been very responsive lately to making changes. It was great when they got the program out originally. We understood very quickly that 10% wasn't going to be enough. The government changed to 75%. And I got to say, for a government, this was light speed. Getting a wage subsidy program out the door in roughly 3 to 4 weeks was very impressive. But then over the course of the summer, we started to see some issues that, we really need addressed that were excluding some business owners, in particular, the need for a sliding scale. So it was great to see Minister Freeland respond to that feedback and get a program out there that is more accessible, that will include more small businesses, and ultimately will save more small businesses as we continue now into the second wave of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because that 30% threshold created this really odd cliff that so many employers were approaching, but just not quite there yet. And it just seems such an arbitrary threshold to put out there. So I agree. I think the changes are going to make it much more accessible for a broader range of employers. Do you guys both expect to see an increase in applications with these changes once people have had a chance to kind of digest everything that's gone on?
You know, I'm expecting to, and particularly now where, you know, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a lot of people with the mindset of thinking, well, this is like SARS, or this is like, you know, some other things we've seen in the past. This is going to be over in a few short weeks. And we're not seeing that. We're seeing that this is going to be a longer term thing, and it's going to be with us for a while. So I think that we are going to be seeing more companies, you know, and I think with the help of people like Ryan and their advisors to educate them, applying for this, because I've seen a lot of companies basically saying the one that without this assistance, they would have had to shut their doors down. So I think we will see an uptake.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I think that mentality originally that this wasn't going to be something that lasts was very present, not just in business owner and consumer mindset, but all of these programs were originally designed to last 3 months. I mean, even the government kind of thought, you know, once we hit June, July, we'll probably be closer to the other side of this than it turns out that we were. So I expect too that as businesses have been able to reopen, but sort of learn that reopening in of itself was not a silver bullet, that the environment that they have come back to is very different. A lot of them are still operating at reduced capacity, reduced hours for some employees. I think things like the wage subsidy, the loan, the rental assistance program as well, are going to see an uptick in use, especially if the second wave results in a second shutdown for businesses in certain sectors.
Yeah, great point, Ryan. That's very very apt. So let's talk about some of the other programs. So if an employer doesn't qualify for the CEWS, or they just don't want to go through the hassle of applying for it, there are other supports available. So I want to talk a little bit about the Canada Emergency Business Account, or the CEBA, as we've been calling it, which the government also announced on October 9th that they were planning to expand. So Ryan, you had mentioned that this program was probably the most widely used by businesses. And I think, Isabella, I think you would agree with that. Why do you think this program has been more widely utilized than others like the CEWS?
I think from our point of view, simply it was fairly easy to go through, especially initially. This is a program that's backed by the government, but it's run through your bank, where most businesses have an existing relationship and a personal banker who manages their small business account. I think too that the restrictions around the money, it wasn't just for wages, it was for other fixed costs. So it was something that was a little bit more flexible as well. I will note, again, this was a program that was originally designed for 3 months. So at the 3-month mark, we were hearing from a lot of businesses that money was running out, that they'd sort of burned through all of this already, especially as they were waiting for a rental program to get into place. So again, very pleased that the minister was able to expand it from 40 to 60,000. That's going to be really good for the people who'd already burned through that money. Where we're still needing a little bit more help, though, is the government has announced that businesses who are using personal bank accounts will have access to it. Unfortunately, it's been about 6 or 7 weeks since that initial announcement, still waiting for the rollout of that program. So there still are a pocket of businesses that are having trouble accessing it. But for the majority that were eligible right off the bat, again, just a very easy to use program, a flexible program. I think the loan is easily understood as well, which really helped business owners get behind it.
Right.
I was going to add just that, you know, I definitely agree. I think with where you had a situation with an employer where they had payroll over 20,000, it's a very simple process to apply. Go onto the bank account. You need your business number. You need to be on your bank's site, application site, and you can apply. You know, I think where the complexity has come in a bit, or really just the amount of work has been for the sole proprietors, that took a bit to come in. When they announced it, even just to kick it off, took some weeks. You know, they announced that they were expanding, and it then took several weeks to really open it up. And really a lot more information for sole proprietors to enter into the system to get approved. and then ensuring that they followed really carefully what was requested in order that they didn't get rejected. Now, the benefit was you can apply, if you get rejected, you can apply as many times as you need to correct that error. So it's definitely expanded. And I do agree with Ryan in terms of now you have those companies or those businesses that have been using a personal bank account. I've never recommended that to clients ever to do that, just to keep that separation between business and personal, but there are companies that do that. So hopefully that'll be clarified soon.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, I wanted to ask you guys about that. So, because like the CEWS, this program also had somewhat restrictive criteria to start with. And then in that it was only accessible to businesses, as you pointed out, above a certain payroll threshold. And then it was changed in the summer to make it accessible for sole proprietors and family-owned businesses. And businesses that were receiving remuneration in other ways, like through a form of dividends and things like that. Did you see a significant increase in usage once those changes were put into place?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was something that, again, we heard loud and clear right off the bat. It was great for those who were eligible. Those who weren't very much wanted access to it. So I think expanding the eligibility criteria was a huge help, and again, saved a lot more businesses. I don't think we're necessarily all of the way there yet. I think there is still a little bit more they can do on the eligibility side. But again, the government has been very, very responsive recently to making positive change in that realm.
Yeah, I have to agree as well with that. And we definitely, as soon as it was opened up, we saw quite a number more companies applying, needing assistance. So definitely a bit more time needed in the application process, which you're dealing with smaller companies, but at the same time, I think that they needed to demonstrate that they did have that need because of the range of expenses that they needed to have.
Yeah, that's great. So Isabella, you had already given us some tips in terms of, for sole proprietors, they are going to need to spend more time on their application. There's a little bit more work involved. Do you have any other tips that you can give to businesses in terms of making sure their application is complete? Or you had also mentioned if you get rejected, you can just apply again. So I guess that's another tip, is don't give up the first time if it doesn't work.
Yes, definitely. I mean, really pay attention to how they're defining things, particularly things like if you're using subcontractors. If you're using subcontractors, you needed to have that. There's that March 1st date. So they had to have been engaged by you prior to that date. If you hired someone after, or you didn't have a contract with someone after that date, those expenses won't apply. So that's one issue. Make sure you put that information together, showing you have a history of hiring subcontractors, provide any contracts you've got in place signed prior to that date. The other thing is, really take use of the CRA website, because it really does outline a number of different avenues that you can, if you go to the canada.ca website, it lists all the subsidies and assistance available to you. So if you find that you don't qualify in the end, let's say you don't meet that criteria where you had to have certain expenses beyond that date, there are secondary regional type of grants that are available that you can apply for. And it lists a number of different things.
No, that's really helpful. And actually it leads right into my next question for both of you, which is are there any programs that you are aware of that you think businesses are not applying for or are not taking advantage of as much as they should?
I would say not necessarily aren't taking advantage of, because it hasn't opened yet. It'll open at the beginning of November. But after labor, we know the biggest fixed cost for small businesses is rent. For those, or property taxes for those that own. But rent was a major issue. The government came out with the SECRA program, which we were optimistic about, but again, very quickly became apparent that this program wasn't going to work, namely because you were at the mercy of your landlord to apply. If your landlord didn't apply, that was it. You were out of luck. The government has replaced that program with CERS, the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, for those following the alphabet soup. It's going to become available in November and works very similarly to the wage subsidy program. It is on a sliding scale. Businesses will be able to receive up to 65% of their rent if their revenue, I think, is dropped 70% or greater. If a business is shut down, that number can jump up to 90%. So given the feedback that we got and how crucial getting help on rent was, we are optimistic that this program will have high uptake. The key, of course, will be for the provinces to step in now and protect from evictions for those businesses that are using this, because that was baked into the previous program with landlord participation and is no longer there come November for businesses in the new one.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that as well. And I think Ryan made a key point about the fact that with the rent subsidy, companies were at the mercy of their employer. And even when it was extended from August to September, a lot of my clients didn't know that, because their landlord didn't know they had to go then and not reapply, but I guess, go in and make sure that they were passing that on. So I think that the new program will provide some better access. And then if, again, as I mentioned, there is the government does provide a number of different options available. There is the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund that is a second option to CEBA if you don't qualify for CEBA. There are different funding sources for women-owned business, for Indigenous-owned business. So there are a number of different avenues that are available to companies who need assistance.
Yeah, that's a great point, Isabella. And I know you've already pointed out the Government of Canada website as well, which has a really comprehensive list of all the programs and initiatives that are out there. So Ryan, I know you have been spending a lot of your time lately making sure that your members are aware of all of the changes. And as you've pointed out, it's been kind of continuous since March that we're continuously getting these updates. So do you have any suggestions for businesses in terms of how do they keep on top of these changes to make sure that they've got the most up-to-date information?
Absolutely. And I will say checking out cfib.ca is a great resource and a great place to go. But it really is important that if you are a member of an association, a chamber of commerce, a member of an association like ours, that you are checking in with the website regularly. We are updating it on almost a daily basis at this point as changes come. I would also highly recommend watching the daily press conferences that are going on in all provinces. I know here in Ontario, Premier Ford is on every day at 1 p.m. like clockwork. Prime Minister Trudeau tends to be in the mornings around 11. But that's where these announcements are made. And it's key to understand not just what's coming and what's happening, but also the lag time between a program announcement and a program rolling out. Whenever any level of government announces something new, we are inevitably getting a number of phone calls in immediately. How can I access it? Do I qualify? Great questions to ask, but almost never during the pandemic has a program been announced and rolled out at the same time. So while we are all very excited when there is new help available, understanding the lead up time is important, not just to know how much time you'll need as a business owner on the ground to sort of wait before you can make a decision, but it's also time you can spend getting what you need in gear, checking in with your accountant, making sure that you have your paperwork or your payroll up to date, make sure that your, whatever HR documents you need are up to date, because we know, and especially now as small businesses are struggling across the country, with the exception of our accountants and our HR small businesses, very rarely does a small business owner get into a business to run a payroll or to do HR work. They get into business to do whatever it is they're selling, whatever service they're giving. So making sure that you have access to your experts and, again, checking in constantly for updates is key to make sure that you're up to date on the programs.
Yeah, Ryan, that's a really, really good point, because I know when you sit through those briefings and you get an announcement about some of these programs, what it actually looks like when the legislation comes out can often be quite different than what you thought you were getting during the press conference. So I think that's a really, really excellent point. Isabella, let's turn it over to you. So what advice would you give to business owners in terms of figuring out what supports are available to them? I know you've already mentioned quite a few things already.
Yeah, I would echo what Ryan has just said, but in particularly, reach out to your advisors when you can. I mean, as entrepreneurs, the best thing you do is running your business, and to worry about, as Ryan said, worry about doing payroll and figuring out what you qualify for. Reach out to those people that you've partnered with, your lawyer, your accountant, to help you and guide you through that. Because I think that's time well spent, and certainly will be worth it in the long run as you discover what you would qualify for. I've mentioned it before, there are a lot of resources out there, a lot of things online. I have found, as this pandemic has progressed, when it first started, we were seeing a lot of, everybody was sending an email, oh, this has come out, a lot of information at the beginning. It's kind of slowed down. So as advisors, I think we ourselves have to make sure that we continue to educate our clients and let them be aware of what's out there, so that we've got that information flowing, because it is constantly changing.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Isabella. Actually, I've also felt like the flow of information has maybe slowed down a little bit. And sometimes I'm even caught off guard myself when the next day I realized that something was announced the day before, which wouldn't have been the case in March, when everybody was, I think, glued to the screens watching what was happening. So I think that's a really, really good point. And I'll use that as an opportunity to plug our firm's, our COVID-19 running blog that we're keeping updated. It's also called our Resource Center. So we are trying to stay on top of all of these various changes and post about it whenever these things come up. So I do strongly encourage you to check that out, as well as the resources that Isabella and Ryan have mentioned. So somehow that's all the time that we have for today already. This went by so fast. So thank you, Ryan and Isabella, so much for being guests on the show. Your contributions were extremely valuable, and these are all very complex programs, and it's just great to hear from a tax and a business perspective in terms of how they're being utilized and what are some of the concerns that we've heard to date. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so now it's time for me to rant. Okay, so I'm going to be ranting today about your health and safety obligations during COVID-19 as an employer. So this is really a refresher, because I know we've talked about this before, but with an increase in COVID-19 cases and a return to greater restrictions, I think it's important for employers to remember their obligations regarding health and safety. So all employers have an obligation to take all reasonable steps to ensure the health and safety of their workers, and employers do need to take this obligation seriously when it comes to COVID-19. Public health guidelines are a great reference in terms of what is necessary to have in place. Pay attention to these, as well as the industry-specific guidelines that are being released and updated on an ongoing basis. Remember that this is not static, it is evolving. So for example, as of September 26th, the Ontario government introduced new mandatory screening guidelines for all businesses to try and ensure the safety of both employees and guests to workplaces. You should also keep in mind that workers have a right to refuse unsafe work, meaning that a worker who does not feel that their employer is taking reasonable steps to ensure their safety can refuse to come to work. And employers don't get to decide whether or not they are meeting health and safety requirements. If the issue can't be resolved between the employer and the employee, the Ministry of Labor has to get involved, and they may order further measures be taken or even impose penalties in certain circumstances. On the flip side, an employee must have a legitimate reason to refuse to work. Just a fear of getting COVID-19, even where an employer has taken preventative measures, is not going to be enough. So we want to keep in mind that employers do generally have a right to require an employee to attend at work, absent these health and safety concerns or entitlement to a leave or a need for accommodation. But employers also need to be asking themselves practically whether they should be exercising that right. So remember that the recommendation is still that if an employee can work from home, they should be doing so. That's still the safest way to proceed. Okay, so that's my rant. That's all the time we have for season 3, episode 9. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, and thank you to Isabella and Ryan for joining me today. Whether they are pandemic related or otherwise, we continue to see many businesses and individuals making mistakes because they don't understand their rights and obligations. The reason is simple: they don't treat their employment relationships as legal relationships. At Rudner Law, we want people to make informed decisions. I invite you to keep up to date on employment law issues by following our social media, subscribing to our newsletter, and checking our COVID-19 Resource Center, which I talked about earlier. But of course, none of that replaces legal advice tailored to your specific circumstances. We always say if you think you need an employment lawyer, you probably do. So feel free to reach out to us. Our next episode will air Tuesday, November 17th. Stuart will be back in the hosting chair, and he will be joined by Lisa Taylor, founder and president of Challenge Factory. Past episodes can be found on YouTube, on our website, and archived on Facebook and LinkedIn. And if you like our page or subscribe to our channels, you will receive notifications when the episodes are live. Thanks to Rob, Rebecca, and Mark for helping put the show together. Everybody take care.